So we're back in Cathedral Ward again. We see lots of Cathedral Ward in this run, man. I think now we're going after the Witches and Paarl. I make a bit of a detour on the way to Hemwick to grab the poison knives up here, and that's for something later. If you're familiar with the game at all, you might be able to guess what it is. I'm going to show something later that is really cheesy and kind of bullshit, but I think it's funny to do, so I'll show it when we get there. We'll see it. So I like to do the Witches and Paarl before Amelia. They're both optional. You don't have to do them. It's advisable to do the Witches because you get the Rune Workshop tool, and it's pretty important for any run that you want to be as optimized as possible. You know, if you want the most out of your build, you really want the Rune tool. Now, if you're just doing an any % speed run, it doesn't matter. But we do all bosses, so it becomes important. Plus, it's just a good area for twin bloodstone shards. And I just find it aesthetically interesting. I think it's the most, if not the most, one of the most interesting and creepy areas in the game. The first time I went to Hemwick Lane, it was unsettling, the imagery at the beginning. So I just like it. I think it's cool. But I like to do the Witches and Paarl before Amelia. Now, it probably makes you a bit overpowered for Amelia, but that's okay. So right here, you need to watch out for the dogs. Their movements are erratic as fuck, and they're annoying. And you'll have 3 riflemen. I just took 1 down. Sometimes you can get this dog sort of caught in those headstones, and it's pretty easy to deal with. But on their own, they're easy. In groups, they get difficult. And then down this path, you'll have a rifleman guarded by 2 dogs. Pretty easy to deal with. Now, interesting, if you come to this area with 15 insight or more, then the madmen will start spawning. They're really tall, dark enemies with with scythes. I think that's what they're called. Like little sickles. They'll start spawning around the area. So if you come below 15 insight, they won't spawn. They're slow. They're not that big of a threat, but they can be, you know, if you haven't quite hit the get good button. This imagery right here, they're all dancing around this fire. I don't know, something about it just always sort of creeped me out, and I love it. So we're gonna run Hemwick fairly quickly. We're gonna do the Witches with insight. A trick that you can do if you want is you can walk into the Witch boss arena and activate the fight so that you gain insight, and then Hunter's Mark out, spend your insight so you have 0 insight, run Hemwick again back to the boss arena, and once you go in, you'll have 0 insight, and then the madmen won't spawn. So you'll only have to deal with the 2 witches, and it makes the fight just fucking... It's not even a fucking fight. It's deacons are harder than the witches. Pinwheel, I think, is harder than the witches. So the witches are more interesting than Pinwheel, but Pinwheel is a more difficult fight than the fucking witches with 0 insight. And I started doing this run, and my L2 button on my controller decided to just say fuck off, and it just wasn't working. So randomly, you'll see me sort of shooting the pistol to check and make sure that, you know, it's going to be responsive, because there are times when you want that parry against those big guys, and I think at one point later it doesn't work, and I get hit, and it pisses me off a bit. So hopefully I can get that working, or else the fight against Garamond and Maria might be It might be some fucking AIDS. So this is a shortcut you take back up to the Charnel Lane lamp. We don't use it, but I always get it just for safety because it's Bloodborne, and you never really know what RNGesus is gonna dump in your lap. You know, sometimes you just get fucked. Like here, look at that. I got hit. I have no idea how I got hit. It on my end, it looked like I avoided that by a fucking mile, but I guess I was wrong. Right here is where my watch. So for whatever reason, my L2 just was not working, and I got hit. So I go ahead and just clean this guy up with a charged R2, and I think an R1, L1. Yeah. So kill this witch throwing the Molotovs, and then right to the right, there's a witch sort of just fucking hanging out. There's me checking my L2. So kill her, or else she'll aggro once you get past her, and then she'll come up behind you and do the the attack where they like scoop out your eyes or slit your throat. You know. Then up here there are some shards. I think one of the madmen will spawn in this little area right here. If you have 15 insight or more. So everybody lately is wanting to throw their fucking hat into the debate, the discussion about whether or not video games cause violence, or if there is some sort of correlation between violent video games and maybe super aggressive behavior, whether or not video games work to cultivate a more aggressive or less empathetic, we'll say, personality, where they just sort of send somebody into a kind of a fever dream of wanting to fuck things up. And everybody has an opinion on this. Everybody wants to talk about it and weigh in. I think it's an interesting discussion to have. I think that there might be some merit. I personally don't believe that it's the case that violent video games breed violent people. I think it's bullshit. There's no evidence to support it if you want to get empirical about it. Now it's working. Goody. So if you wanted to get empirical about it, there's really no evidence to support it. There might be some evidence to support the fact that violence makes people a bit more aggressive, kids more aggressive, but aggression is a line, you know, so it's not a very good argument, I don't think. Instead of asking the question, do video games make people violent, I think we should be asking, what kinds of people then do we want video games to make? If we make the argument that there is such an influence that they work to sort of create people or influence them in such a deep way, then from that I think it sort of follows that video games can do the opposite. They can make them moral, or a kind of human being that is more along the lines of what we might want to see. Is that the case then? Is that a question that we ought to be asking instead? And that's kind of a dangerous, it can be a dangerous area to get into, I think. For a good reason. Right here, you'll see me go left. That is where the witch always spawns. So we do damage to her, and you'll see that she starts getting kind of bloody a little bit. So now we just go on the hunt for her. I saw her, I think. Yeah. Now right here, I get her down to around half health, and I go start looking for the second witch. The second witch will actually spawn in, and you can take out the second witch, right? So after you kill the first witch, right, it goes into a second phase where the second witch spawns in with a health bar, and then the first witch spawns back, I think, with half health. But this is fucking bullshit. But you can kill the second witch before that phase begins, and then when you kill the first witch and the second witch's health bar pops up, it's already empty. So you get rid of the second phase altogether. Now here's the second witch. Okay. Now usually it only takes a charged R2, a visceral, an R1, L1, L1, 2 cycles of that, and then maybe an R1 to get rid of the second witch. So here you see me, I sort of test. Okay, you see how the health bar went down? I know that's the first witch. You want to find the second witch and hit her, and you'll know that it's the second witch because the health bar doesn't decrease. So that's what you want. If you want to make this fight even fucking easier than it already is. Even with, you know, Insight and the Madmen spawning in. So I see that's the first witch, and I trot along to find the second witch. And she's done. I see the first witch spawn right over there with a little red orb, pink orb. These witches always make me think of, I think her name is Ray from Stephen King's Dark Tower, Wizard in Glass. Always makes me think of that for some reason. If you're into Dark Tower series, I love it. So, if we make the argument that video games have that kind of influence, and video games should instead trying to create certain kinds of people, then we have to ask, I think, well, who sets sort of this standard of what makes a good person? You know, there has to be then some sort of objective idea of what a good person is. If you break these barrels, the Wandering Nightmare drops for some twin Bloodstone shards. And we can't do that. We can't do that in a pluralistic society, but even outside of such a pluralistic society, it gets real hard to say people have to be, you know, only X without room for Y or Z or any other letters of the alphabet. It doesn't work that way. And then you can get into the discussion about whether or not art, video games as art, have the responsibility of showing what is or showing what ought to be. So right here, I think we go up to a +5. We get the extra twin Bloodstone shards soon to go up to a +6 for the Paarl fight. And by the time we fight, I think the Shadows later, it's a +7 because we run Canehurst after Amelia. Don't fight Ligarius yet, but we do run Canehurst to get the chunks and open up the shortcut to Ligarius. I like to clean up Ligarius later. Before the DLC, but later. So, right, so I think we have to ask ourselves whether art bears the shoulders sort of this burden of showing you what is, you know, sort of the reality of the world and being creative in that sense, or if it should only show us what ought to be, you know, the sort of normative, you know, like human behavior, right? So if you want a society to be, you know, completely moral and decent by some subjective standard, then you say art must only represent that, right? But that doesn't work. You know, historically, that's just not the way shit is. And that's an old argument too. You can go back and read Plato's views on art, and you know, this type of shit doesn't work. When it comes to art, we like the revelatory, you know, we like to explore the many sort of the catacombs of human behavior and motivation and intention. And we like to explore violence, you know, and even then, you know, I have heard the argument against, you know, games like Grand Theft Auto, and you know, at the sort of the microscopic level, Yes, it is violent, and yes, sometimes it looks like pointless, needless violence against this or that, but at the macroscopic level, there's a commentary going on throughout the game that if you don't care about games, or if you just sort of glance over it, that you're not going to get. And then you're going to talk about it in an unfair way, like Matt Bevin, the governor of Kentucky, who's a fuckwit. Okay, right here. Okay. So far, I have not died once in this run. I normally don't worry about the idea of dying in this game until the DLC, and maybe sometimes Wet Nurse and Gehrman. Right? Sometimes those fights can go pretty sideways. But the only way to get to Hypogean Jail is to die to this bagman. That's the only way. So, can I still claim that this, up to this point, is a no-death run? Or did I just fuck it? Did I just fuck it up? I don't know. I know if you want to do like a no-hit run, you can do that, but it is impossible in Bloodborne to do a no-damage run, because in the Nightmare Mensis, you have to take damage when you're running from the lamp up to like the spider room, and if you want to go to the DLC, you have to take damage from the lesser amygdala that teleports you to the DLC. If you want to go to Lecture Hall first floor to get to the Nightmare Frontier earlier on, instead of taking the ladder from the second floor, you have to take frenzy damage. So I don't know. There's no other way to get here than to die. I'm gonna go ahead and still say I haven't died. But if you disagree, I get it. I get it. Right here, I'm checking to see where this bagman is, because they'll fuck you up real fast right here, and I don't want to get hit at all. I want this moon rune that will give us some more echoes. I'm going to kill this witch. And it's going to be sort of a quick run through Hypogean right here. We're going to get some shards, we're going to kill a couple of pigs, we're going to fist them real good. And then I think we go back to the dream, and then we do Paarl. We have a good Paarl fight, we have a good Amelia fight. They go by real quick. Easy strategies. Paarl and Amelia can be hard, if you fight them at a lower level. At blood level 4, they're both still pretty easy, to be honest with you, if you use these strats in this video. You shouldn't have any problems with a blood level 4 run. Let me rephrase. I never had any problems with a blood level 4 run until the shadows. They were always my wall. One Reborn can be kind of rough too. But. So, see if you can't fist this pig in its anus pipe. Okay. So yeah, I think asking that kind of question instead, rather than asking if video games cause violence, we should be looking at if, and this is all sort of like, theoretical stuff, I guess. I think we should be asking what kinds of video games do we want then? Like old Bible NES video games? Fuck that. Everything is just Tetris and fucking Mario. No thanks. No thanks. Yeah, I mean, you tend to have like a couple of very, I think, sort of well-defined camps on this. With some, there are some people out there that are wildly different, but it's either yes, they do create violent people, or people think, well, no, I mean, people were already violent. Video games just, I don't know, maybe they Maybe they identified with the games because they were violent, and if that's the case, then they would seek out violent literature or something. You know, so like if somebody was, oh, I don't know, like if we didn't have violent video games, maybe they would watch violent movies. If we didn't have violent movies or violent video games, maybe they would go read something like The Painted Bird is a is a pretty violent book by Kaczynski, or maybe they would read a Stephen King novel or a book like that, you know. And so where do you go? Like, do you say, okay, well, we can't just depict violence in any form of art? We can't, you know, we can't take that chance, you know. Is that how far we're willing to go? You know, why video games? Is it just because kids are drawn to video games? I mean, there's a whole, it's a huge discussion to have with so many intricate parts, and I don't think we're ever going to have a decent answer, you know. I don't think there's ever going to be some definitive study that shows some sort of causal link between all of this. I think it's all about using our better judgment in context. Is a violent video game in the best interest of this particular child before you in this particular moment? And, you know, we just have to learn how to be, I want to say wise, or, you know, adults capable of good discernment in those cases. But it makes it more messy, I guess. It's not a good answer, but we're not after answers. I don't have the fucking answer. So here I just sell the hunter's bone just to give me a couple hundred extra echoes. I don't use the hunter's bone. So that brings us to level. Again, all strength and skill dump. And we use, I think, a fire paper here for Paarl. Can't use bolt because it's Paarl. Right, so we use a fire paper here, and then a fire paper for Amelia later. And that takes care of all of our fire paper. Normally, I would use fire paper for Rom, but I think in this run, I just go ahead and use Bolt. It could be the case that we rerun the Healing Church Workshop to get the badge at the top. I don't like to waste time running that area, though, because we don't have the key to Upper Cathedral Ward. So it to me, it just becomes a waste of time just to get that badge to buy fire paper, and it's just not worth it. So I think I actually don't do that. So here I have had one of these bagmen just jump across the fucking screen and put his fucking foot in my ass. And it was a one-shot. So I always try my best to sort of take a wide loop in that room. Okay, so this is a fairly easy strategy. R1, L1. L1. Do the same thing on the leg here. Do the same thing on the arm. I did not go to the other arm right here because I'm doing so much damage. It just, you know. And then I smack her in the head. So it's a fairly quick and easy no-hit on Paarl every time. It's all about limb staggering, limb breaking, and just keeping you cool. So yeah, everybody wants to have, you know, an opinion on it, and I don't really want to say that anybody's opinion is wrong necessarily. I tend to value any perspective for the most part. I will respect multiple opinions, but my personal view, you know, is no. There is no good link between video games and violence any more than there's a link between violent books and violent movies and violence. I think there's a link between violence and violence. I think there's a link between being violent and wanting to do harm and seeking out those things that depict it. So next, I do believe we go straight to Amelia, and then we run Cainhurst. Yes. So that is next.